And welcome into the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski and Jim Leitner here as the Fighting Saints, their longest road trip of the season. They take on 3 different teams in 3 different cities on 4 different nights over the Thanksgiving break. Started in Des Moines on Wednesday. It culminated on Saturday night in Sioux Falls, bookended by wins. A little blemish in the middle against Fargo. For the second time this season, 2 of Dubuque's 4 losses now have come against the Fargo Force. But when we talked about this road trip, Jim, as we welcome you in again to the Fighting Saints Report here, only 2 more Fighting Saints reports before a long Christmas break for the Fighting Saints. But when we talked about this road trip, we said 2-1 would be very solid because no game is easy in the USHL. 2 very tough teams in Fargo and Des Moines, and Sioux Falls have been playing better as Dubuque faced them. But 2-1 also because of how much travel was going to be there. 3-4 is never easy, especially when you're bouncing around from central Iowa all the way up to North Dakota, down to South Dakota, and then back. And that's exactly what they do. They went 2-1. They beat Des Moines convincingly on Wednesday. Again, a setback against Fargo, but then an overtime winner against Sioux Falls. And in talking to a lot of players, that overtime winner against Sioux Falls is really the difference between a great feeling from that road trip and just an okay feeling on that road trip.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And you look at not just this 3-4, but the 2 games prior. So it was actually a 5 games that they've been away, and to go 4-1 on a 5-game road trip is outstanding. And again, to win 2 out of 3 on a road trip like this weekend, I think that's outstanding. And Ty Jackson was even saying that good teams go 500 on the road. Really good teams go 500 on the road. And right now the Fighting Saints are 1-1 on the road right now, which is phenomenal. But again, they find ways to win on the road, and I think they faced a little bit of adversity. Well, not just a little bit of adversity, but a lot of adversity this weekend, and to win 2 out of 3. You're playing 2 of the best teams in the Western Conference in Des Moines and Fargo. For my money, they're 2 of the better teams in the Western Conference. And Sioux Falls, which is in last place, but has been playing really well, playing its best hockey of the season. So 2 out of 3 is really a good road trip, and something the Fighting Saints should be really proud of.
And the key to a good road trip, or one of the keys at least, is getting off to a good start. And that's exactly what they did Wednesday night. It was their best game of the road trip, I think, by far in Des Moines, complete 60. And the first 2 games that went past regulation, Des Moines was able to bounce back after a Dubuque quick start and really take over the game after period 1. I think Des Moines dominated second and third periods in both the first 2 games. This was a little bit of a different feel. Dubuque didn't get off to that scorching hot start, but Des Moines was also not able to make those adjustments that they made after period 1 in the first 2 games, and I thought Dubuque really just controlled the pace from start to finish and put together a pretty clean and decisive 4-1 victory.
4-1, in reality, it should have been a 4-0 victory for the Fighting Saints, but you're right. I think one thing that the Fighting Saints did really well is they didn't, they protected the puck. They didn't turn the puck over. They were good in transition. And Des Moines is a team that really jumps on if you make mistakes in the neutral zone, they jump on them, and then the puck ends up in the back of your net. The Fighting Saints weren't making those mistakes. They were really taking care of the puck. And, I think a 4-1 victory is especially impressive to me because they had just played Des Moines, 4 or 5 days earlier, and that was one of those games that went to overtime, and they really had to struggle to win that one in overtime. But this was a very thorough effort, a dominant effort, and I think that's really hard to do. When you're so familiar with an opponent, you have so much recent history against them, and I think it really speaks to the effort of the coaching staff in getting this team prepared for Wednesday night's game, and it speaks a lot to the players for listening to that game plan and executing it the way they did. Again, I think that was obviously the most thorough victory of the weekend, but also I think might have been one of the more thorough wins of the season for the Fighting Saints. I guess you could argue the win in Waterloo a couple weekends ago was really good too, but this I thought was a very thorough victory, very good defensive effort.
And you made a good point. It probably should have been a shutout, and Eric Portillo will be the first one to tell you that it was just a little bit of indecision on his part when he decided to looked like he decided, I'm going to go play that puck. Oh, wait, I'm not. Yes, I am. And by that time, Fensterstock got in and put it behind him. And for the most part, I mean, Portillo, you can't complain about much the Fighting Saints have done this season. I think I said that against Fargo in the broadcast. You can't really find a bad split for the Fighting Saints this season. Home versus road, goals against versus goals for. But Portillo, if there's been one kind of area where he might need to improve for the Fighting Saints, it's been playing the puck and just maybe when he plays the puck. There are times, once a game it seems, where he'll get himself in a little bit of trouble. It hasn't cost the Fighting Saints more than I think that one against Des Moines, but that might just be an area where Portillo wants to work on. And look, it's a huge weapon if you have a goalie that can play the puck, and this is a great time for him to continue to hone that skill because it's not an easy thing for a goalie to do.
No, and I think Eric Portillo has done a wonderful job of transitioning from European hockey to North American hockey in pretty much every aspect except maybe playing the puck.
Yep.
And it's tougher. It's a lot tougher. I don't think people really understand how difficult it is to, you have different angles. You have a lot of different aspects of the game that you have to adjust to, from the large ice surface in Europe to the smaller ice surface in North America. I think he's done a great job in net. I think he's done a great job of adjusting to that. But again, when you're playing the puck in North America, you don't have as much time or space, and the angles are a little bit different. And I think that's one thing. When he's in net, that's 90% of your game, 95% of the game. Playing the puck is not as much of you don't do that as much as you do as when you're in the net.
Yeah.
So I think that's one thing that he's really had to adjust to. But again, I think like you said, that's a huge weapon to have when you're on the back end, and you're like a third defenseman. You can move the puck. But I think that's something that's going to come. And I know there are people who say, don't let him play the puck, don't let him. But I don't think that's the answer either. I mean, he is a weapon, and that's something that he likes to do, and he's got good hands for passing wise. So I don't think I'd take that away from him. It's just going to be a little while before he really develops it and gets as comfortable passing the puck as he is in stopping the puck.
Absolutely. And then the Fighting Saints a day off for Thanksgiving, but they're on the road in Fargo on Friday night. And this was the one game of the whole weekend, and really one of the few games this season for the Dubuque Fighting Saints where they were never able to get much of a flow offensively. Fargo wins 5-3. And I think part of the reason there was no flow to the game, and quite honestly, watching it live, it wasn't just on Dubuque's side, it was on Fargo's side too with no flow, was because there were 13 combined penalties called in a game that didn't have a single fight, that didn't have a single misconduct. All minors, 13 penalties called. That's a lot when you're just calling minors. And this isn't to say that the penalties were the reason why Dubuque lost that game. If anything, it was Fargo capitalizing on their power play and Dubuque's inability to capitalize on their power play being the difference. But it just felt like a sloppy game from the get-go. And I'm not one to blame officiating for wins and losses, but I think the onus has to be on the officiating in that game for the lack of flow, because it was power play after power play. And when Dubuque had 5 penalties called on them in the first period, what happens? Fargo gets 4 called on them in the second period. It felt like a couple makeup calls there, and it just really was unable to get any sort of a real feel for a hockey game.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember back when Fargo was here, that there weren't a lot of penalties in that game. So you're right. That was a much more entertaining game. You have much better flow to the game. That was a really fun game to watch. Even though that was a loss for the Fighting Saints, it was entertaining because it wasn't really choppy, and there wasn't as many penalties. But I think you're right, and I think sometimes we do get a little overly critical of officiating, and sometimes they don't have good games. I mean that's part of the deal, and as a team, you have to overcome those things, and you're always going to have adversity here and there, and you have to overcome those things. And it's not a good thing to just sit there and point at the officiating and say that it was bad or whatever, it was choppy or whatever. You have to overcome those things, and the quicker you learn how to do those things, the better off you're going to be in the long run. But you're right. I don't think it had the greatest flow.
No.
But again, on the other hand, I don't know if Dubuque's a really good matchup with Fargo. Fargo, obviously, they've beaten them twice, and it's a good matchup for Fargo. But you're right. I didn't really feel like there was much of a flow, and move on.
Yeah, and to be fair, I think the first game against Fargo, there were fewer play stoppages, but there was also that same sense of there wasn't a ton of flow. Fargo's not a team that's going to trade chances with you, and that's part of the reason I think Dubuque has been so good this season is because a lot of teams like to go run and gun offensively. It's not that they lack the systems on the back end, but Dubuque is so good defensively that they can capitalize when the teams try to take advantage of them defensively. Fargo's just a team that kind of buckles down and tries to do the same thing with Dubuque, I think maybe with a little less depth at the forward position, but it's a team that now has beaten Dubuque twice, and if Dubuque is going to see Fargo again at any time during 2019-2020, it'll be the Clark Cup Finals. That was their season finale, and I think with as much as Dubuque's played the Western Conference, they might be a little bit happy that they don't have to see Fargo again.
Yeah, I would agree, and again, the Western Conference has really been tough on the Fighting Saints the last few years. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you mentioned most of the games that they played in the first half here so far have been against the Western Conference. Yep. So to have the kind of record the Fighting Saints have primarily against the Western Conference really sets you up well for the rest of the season. And that's one thing to be really excited about.
And the final game of this road trip was Sioux Falls, and this shows, I think, how good this Fighting Saints team is, how resilient they are. They had to take a 4-hour bus trip from Fargo to Sioux Falls right after that 5-3 loss. They get in late. They don't get a ton of sleep. Weary legs, and they come out, and they did enough against Sioux Falls, a Sioux Falls team that had won 2 games in a row after really stumbling for the entire month of November, but they had scored 11 goals. The offense wasn't an issue anymore for Sioux Falls, and Dubuque put together a gritty performance. It certainly wasn't the best performance of the season, but you're usually not going to get that with a third game in 4 days. But they were able to continue to move the legs, and in overtime, it was a clinic for the minute one that Dubuque played in overtime. They ended up scoring the game-winning goal with Dylan Jackson to tie Jackson, but they possessed the puck for every single minute and 1 second of that overtime. And that's the name of the game in 3-on-3 possession. They wore down the Sioux Falls starters, and eventually it's old reliable Jackson to Jackson in the back of the net.
Yeah, and I thought Sioux Falls actually did a nice job in overtime because they played it's kind of like in basketball, a man-to-man, a real tight man-to-man defense. Mm-hmm. And, they were blanketing the 3 players that they're out there for Sioux Falls were blanketing the 3 players for Dubuque. Mm-hmm. It was just a matter that Dubuque did just a little bit extra job, and Mark Cherimetta did a really good job of possessing the puck towards the end of overtime that allowed the Fighting Saints to get that the line change. Mm-hmm. Sioux Falls was caught back on its heels and really couldn't change because it was at the other end of the ice. Mm-hmm. And then the Jacksons took over. And Dylan Jackson actually made a great play behind the net. Nice little stick lift of a defender to gain control of the puck. Fed his twin brother, and that was all she wrote. And, in talking to Ty, again, he said, when you're in that situation and you have 3 tired defenders on the opposite side, makes things a little bit easier. Mm-hmm. And they really put on a clinic when they jumped over the boards. Yeah,
he gave a lot of credit to the line before them and setting up the
goal. Rightly
so. And you saw it. Dylan was 2 steps behind Sioux Falls, and I mean he's quick, but he got in front of the Sioux Falls defense real quick to lift the stick, throw it in front for Ty, and they get the game winner. Overall, a great weekend for the Fighting Saints, and really the end of a great month of November. And we'll touch on the month of November as a whole. We're going to do our 3 stars from the entire month. There were 11 games total for the Fighting Saints in November, and so we'll list each one of our 3 stars after this break. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski, Jim Leitner, and it was a busy month of November for the Fighting Saints, but overall a very successful month for Dubuque as they're able to, in their final week of November, come out with 2 out of a possible 3 wins, 4 out of a possible 6 points. And this is a team that has had contributions up and down the lineup. Only 3 losses, I should say, in the month of November, but 8 wins for the Fighting Saints, a fantastic month, with most of those games being played on the road at least to end the month. A 6-5 split, 6 at home to start, 5 on the road to end. And there were some great performances individually that I think stood out above the rest. Again, the whole team playing very well, but we're going to get into our 3 stars right now. We'll go 3-1 if you want to kick things off with your 3rd star of the month.
Can I do my honorable mention, guys?
Sure,
first?
We can do some HMs.
Well, I had some guys that I thought really kind of flew under the radar in their efforts. I thought were really good. Reggie Millette, Ben Schulteis, and Kalen Taylor. Those 3 guys they don't necessarily put up the big points. They're guys who kind of fly under the radar, outstanding defensively, and I think that's really a hallmark of this team so far is the way they've been playing defensively, the way they've killed penalties in key situations. And Reggie, Ben, and Kalen, I thought were outstanding in the way they contributed to the team without putting up the big points. You look at the USHL honors every week; they honor the guys who put up the big points.
Yep.
And I think these guys deserve a lot of credit for the effort they've given. And but there are a lot of guys who should have got honorable mention. I kind of feel bad for not.
I was going to say I'll throw in 2 more HMs because we love to break the rules here. But a lot of people do deserve credit here. I thought Antonio Venuto and Jimmy Glynn have gone from good pieces in the bottom 6 to now giving the Fighting Saints really 3 deep lines with the way they played at the end of the month. You have Cherameta on that line with Venuto and Glynn, and that was the best line for the last 2 weekends for the Fighting Saints. Now you can roll 3 lines that all have scoring threats. Them stepping up from just role players to actual offensive threats, pretty good. And I think Robert Cronin took the next step at the end of this month as well, and that was partly because he was brought up from the bottom line to play some top 6, top 9 minutes. So really a lot of guys to choose from. But if we can get into our 3 stars here, these are guys that I think, separated themselves even more from those honorable mentions. Not many players had bad months for the Fighting Saints, but who's your number 3?
I'm going to go with Reese Gaber. 11 games, had 10 points, 6 goals, 4 assists, and it seemed like he always came up with big goals when they needed them. And that's what you expect from one of your guys in your leadership group. And I just look back at the game where he got popped in the nose and came back and scored 2 goals, and they were 2 highlight reel goals, and I'm sure they were on USHL Play of the Week goals. But he's a guy who's been so consistent and so hard nosed, and a guy that everybody really looks up to. And in Des Moines the other night, he was playing on a bad ankle, and wanted to play. He did not want to be taken out of the game because he loves the game so much. And I know the coaches made an example of him after the game and showing the team how much if you love the game, you don't feel that pain as much. And he's just a tough, hard-nosed kid, and had a great month.
Yeah, Reese Gaber, a fantastic month. My 3rd star is actually one of your honorable mentions, but I had to throw Ben Schulteis up there. 3 goals this month. All of them came in the last weekend. He had 1 goal against Des Moines and 2 against Fargo. And that 2-goal game against Fargo, the first 2-goal game for a Fighting Saints defenseman since Kalen Taylor did it last year in Madison in February. He had a regulation goal and an overtime winner. But it's just the 6th time a Fighting Saints defenseman has had a 2-goal game in the Tier 1 era. I was looking through stats. You would think it might be a little bit more, but it is tough to get a couple goals in this league, let alone 2 from the blue line. So Ben Schulteis, for that reason, he was a +6 on the month. And the USHL doesn't keep track of hits or blocked shots, but I promise you he's leading this team in hits, and he's right up there with Luke Robinson in terms of block shots. I think those 2 have to be 1-2. Robinson might edge him there, but it was a great month for Schulteis, and he's really been a key contributor for the Fighting Saints. 5 points in 18 games from the blue line. He had 3 points in 22 games all of last season for Green Bay. He's definitely taken the next step.
No doubt about it, and he's a guy that the Fighting Saints have really coveted since last season when he was in Green Bay, and they weren't quite able to get him last season, but they were able to draft him, and I know the Fighting Saints were really excited to get him in the draft. And I think he's been, you look at what he did in Green Bay last year, he's been so much better than that, and really taken that next step, and a great example of an extra year of development.
Yep.
My number 2 is I'm going to fudge the rules, as I always do.
Yeah.
My number 2 is a co-number 2, and it's the Jackson twins, Ty and Dylan. Both of them had 11 points in 11 games. Average a point a game. That averages a point a game by my math.
Yep. That's the easy math that we like to do here.
Yeah, that's the only math I like to do. But again, those
only math you like to do, or only math you can do?
Well, true. That's a good point.
Both.
Good point. But those two guys have really taken. It's so exciting. You look back at how they were last year. They weren't quite as consistent, and I thought last year they had a great start, kind of hit a wall, and really, it took them a while to figure things out again. But this year they've come out guns a-blazing, and they've gotten that great start, and they've continued that. They've maintained that good start, and teams are having a hard time figuring them out and how to stop them, which is something that they did last year. And Ty leads the team with 21 points, and Dylan is right behind him with 20. But I really like how they're playing with grit. They're getting into guys' grills, when after, if there's a confrontation or anything like that, they're tougher, they're bigger, they're stronger, and so excited that they decided to come back for a second year of development rather than going to Northeastern this season. And I'm sure they'll agree that this was a great decision to come back.
Yeah, they're making it pay off. And look, last year wasn't a bad year, especially for rookies. They both had over 40 points last year. Now through 18 games, they're both halfway to what their season totals were last year. And you're right, the hot start that they got off to last year really slowed down for honestly December, January, and February before they were able to pick it back up consistently. There's been no slowing down. It's been red hot from the get-go, and if anything, it's actually gotten better. The two biggest things for me, because they're also my number 2 star, I had to cheat as well, but you have to put the Jacksons in the same sentence.
You do.
Their stat lines are almost identical. They're almost like the same person out there. But the two reasons I think they're so much better is, one, you mentioned, they're so much harder on the puck now. Last year, they were easy to push off the puck. They learned it towards the end of last year. I mean, this is just the carryover from what we saw the last month and into the playoffs. They've just gotten better, but they're harder on the puck, and if you're willing to push back and stand up for yourself, then people aren't going to be as hard on you. They're not going to be as willing to go after it. It's one thing if your teammates are standing up for you. It's another thing when you're pushing back yourself. I think that's number 1 for the Jacksons. But number 2 is they're shooting the puck. Yeah. Last year, it felt like until the end of the season, they were really trying to force that wide open passing play, that dunk play, and that's really tough to do in the USHL at any level, to make that perfect pass for a wide open net. This year they're ripping shots, especially Dylan. Ty's taken more of the playmaker role. Dylan has taken more of the shooter role, but there have been multiple times where he's at the top of the right dot on the power play or even strength, and has been able to put a hard, perfect shot in the right place. I think their willingness to shoot and their willingness to go into those areas that you have to go into to score goals and to get points have been the two biggest keys to their transformation into legitimate top players in this league.
Yeah, and I think they're maybe a step quicker, so they're getting plays off a little bit quicker rather than, I think last season when they were struggling a little bit, I think teams collapsed on them or closed on them a little quicker, and then they couldn't get a shot off or they couldn't get that pass off. But they're just a step quicker, and they're really a step ahead of everybody else. And it's been a huge factor. And you take those two guys out of the lineup, and it'd be interesting to see where they are. I don't want to think about that, but,
no.
But they've been really dynamic and really what we've expected from them.
Yeah, they're a step quicker. Part of that's the physical nature of it. You mentioned they got bigger and stronger. I think also it's part confidence. I mean, that's being a step ahead of someone, is knowing that you're going to make the right play before they know what play is being made, and that's also why guys can't close on them, because before they get the puck, they know what they're going to do. Yeah,
and like from my perspective too, in talking to these guys after the game, or when I do talk to them, there's such a difference maturity-wise this year as opposed to last year. Last year it seemed like even when you talked to them, they might have been a little bit tentative, or they might have been a little bit shy. But this year there's just so much confidence, and that's with a year of maturity. And again, I think it was an outstanding decision to come back, and something they're really reaping the benefits of. And for their benefit, when they go to Northeastern next year, they're going to be that much more ready to play and make a difference at Northeastern. So good for them for making that decision.
Well, based on the way this has gone, and also because I cheated and looked at your paper, I know we have the first number 1 star, but that is Eric Portillo. And we touched on him before in the show, but this month he was 6-2. He had a 1.87 goals against average, and the 2 games that he lost, the one against Fargo was maybe an anomaly. I mean, he gave up 4 goals. The other goal was an empty netter, but even a couple of those goals were deflections in front that were tough for him to stop. And then the loss against Waterloo was a penalty shot, and against one of the best teams, if not the next best team in the USHL, maybe behind the Fighting Saints or Chicago, whoever you're willing to put number 1. But he hasn't let in many, if any, goals that he shouldn't let in, and I think that's a big difference between this year and last year. Matthew Thiessen was fantastic for the Fighting Saints, but he did have a propensity to let in that softie every once in a while. This year, you haven't seen that from Eric Portillo. 6-2 on the month of November, a 1.87 goals against average, and he makes all the saves he should. He makes some that he definitely shouldn't, and some that some can't. And anytime a goal goes in, there's usually a wide open net or a deflection in front. He's just so rock solid.
Yeah, you allowed 15 goals in 8 games. That's outstanding. And 4 straight games allowing just 1 goal. That's hard to do in the USHL. I mean, this is a really good league. But again, I think to your point, I think he's a big guy. Obviously he's a big guy. But he looks really big in the net. I think, last year you mentioned Matthew Thiessen. Again, he's another big guy, but there were times when he didn't look big in the net. He didn't look like he was filling up the net as well as he should have. But Portillo, when he's in the net, he's big, he's athletic, he's quick, and he really fills the net. And, I mean, that's a big key when you're looking at tips or deflections or pucks that the goaltender doesn't even see. When you're big and you fill the net like an Eric Portillo does, you're going to make saves just because they hit your body and you have no idea where the puck is. But again, I think he had an outstanding month, and right now he's 3rd in the USHL in goals against average at 2.13. He's tied for 1st with 10 wins, and he's 5th with a .910 save percentage. That's elite, and that's exactly what the Fighting Saints were looking for when they drafted him in the first round last year, and a big reason why the Buffalo Sabres took him in the NHL draft. And I know in reading some commentary out of Buffalo, they're really excited about his future. Granted, he's here in Dubuque, and then he's going to go to Michigan for a couple years at least. But Buffalo is really excited about him long term and the development that he's going to make over the next 4 or 5 years. So I would not be surprised to see Eric Portillo making a dent in the National Hockey League, before too long.
Yeah, Eric Portillo, fantastic. The Fighting Saints, fantastic in the month. 8-3 to finish November with plenty of long road trips, a lot of games at home, and now they'll have 4 in December before a lengthy Christmas break, and then 3 more to end the month. 7 total in December, but it almost feels like 2 separate months when you start, then have that long break, and then end. It's Muskegon twice this weekend. December 6th is a family 4-pack night. December 7th is Teddy Bear Toss, and that'll be a great night, as it always is. Quick note, because there's a Fighting Saints alum in Hershey, but the Hershey Bears with another world record on the Teddy Bear Toss last night. 45,000 plus stuffed animals. And I know Zach Fish was walking up to the broadcast booth with his trash bag full of teddy bears and chucking them down when that first goal was scored. But that's an impressive mark for Hershey. That breaks their own world record by, I believe, close to 17,000, if I'm remembering correctly. I think they had about 28,000 last year. They have 17,000 more this year. It's a pretty impressive feat from Hershey.
And more importantly than that, I think it's just an awesome cause. When you look at the Toys for Tots program and the Marine Corps that puts that on, it's an outstanding gesture. And again, it's an example of how the hockey community really goes out of its way to help those that are less fortunate. And it's a wonderful night here in Dubuque when they do it, and it's just a great cause, and I'm glad that the entire hockey world has embraced this. And every team that has one, I think every team pretty much does have one.
Yeah.
But it's great for the local community, and it really speaks a lot about the Fighting Saints, not just being a hockey team, but they're a valuable member of the community.
Yeah. So Teddy Bear Toss is Saturday night, family 4-pack Friday night. Then the following weekend, the final game before the holiday break for the team is December 14th, Saturday night, against the Green Bay Gamblers. It will be the second matchup between Dubuque and Green Bay this season, with the first one coming the previous night, Friday the 13th. Watch out, spooky stuff could happen there in Green Bay right before the holiday break. I think that's already the second or third Friday the 13th we've had in 2019, and sometimes you don't get any, but this segment's running long because we're on all kinds of tangents, so we'll have to take a break. We go around the USHL after this, and then it's Christmas time because right when Thanksgiving ends, or in Jim's case, even before Thanksgiving begins, the Christmas decorations go up, the holiday music and the holiday movies are on, so we're going to do a couple wish lists to end this program. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski, Jim Leitner, going around the USHL as another busy week, staggered by the Thanksgiving holidays, but you had games from Wednesday all the way through Sunday this week in the USHL. We'll get into the entire slate, but before we do that, some big news coming out of the USHL yesterday. Greg Moore, the head coach of the Chicago Steel, who went to the Clark Cup Finals last year, who are off to an incredible start this year. He's a former assistant coach at the NTDP, but he was just named the head coach of the Toronto Marlies, the AHL affiliate for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Sheldon Keefe moved up to the NHL after Babcock was fired from the Maple Leafs, and now Greg Moore takes a huge step up. So big news out of the USHL, not just players from the USHL going to the NHL or the AHL ranks, but the coaches move up there too, and this is a good move for Greg Moore.
No doubt about it, and it really speaks volumes about the USHL and its value when you look at it from an NHL perspective. You know, we've seen over the last 10 or 15 years how the number of players out of the USHL being drafted has significantly increased, and the number, you're getting more numbers every year of guys being drafted. But you know, you're looking at the other side of it too, and you know, the people who are developing those players are starting to get some really good looks from the professional level. And you know, it's really impressive to me that a move like this can be made in the middle of a season. You know, Dubuque is really more of or the USHL is really more of a developmental league, and you know, a lot of times you see guys move on at the end of a season. But to have this, for the Toronto Maple Leafs organization to say, hey, this is the guy we want, and we're going to go get him in the middle of a season, really speaks volumes about Greg Moore and the job that they're doing in Chicago. I think the Steel invests a lot of money, a lot of time, and a lot of effort into development, and probably one of the biggest development staffs in the entire USHL. And the NHL has taken notice, and good for Greg Moore for getting this opportunity, and not just good for him, but I think good for the whole USHL and a lot of coaches in this league to be recognized the way Greg Moore was this weekend.
So again, Greg Moore, the former head coach of the Chicago Steel, moving up to the AHL, the Toronto Marlies, and that's not just landing in the AHL alone, that's landing at one of, if not the premier organization in the AHL. So congratulations to Greg Moore and the Chicago Steel. Still off to a great start. We'll see if that has any effect on the team, but I'm guessing the way Chicago operates and just how good they are, quite frankly, it won't have much of an effect. They're a big part of our Around the USHL because they were locked in one of the tightest battles this weekend. A good series against Muskegon. Muskegon wins on Friday 6-4 over Chicago. But then Chicago beats them the following night in overtime 4-3, a rematch of the conference finals last year. And Muskegon's not as good as they were last year. Chicago is probably better overall than they were last year, but it's still a very tight series and a very good series. And with a split in the series, it means that the Fighting Saints didn't lose any ground on the Chicago Steel in the points race.
Exactly. I believe that was a home-and-home series, and each team won on opposing ice. But again, we've kind of been looking at for Muskegon. You know, right now they're sitting at 9-9-2, and I think we've both agreed that that's a team that's better than 9-9-2.
Yeah.
And so that's a big feather in their cap. But again, you know, you look at it in, you know, a team like Chicago, a team like Dubuque, a team like Waterloo, they're kind of all running away from the USHL in terms of the standings. You get an opportunity to play like a team like that. That's a statement game or statement weekend. And, you know, I think Muskegon made a pretty good statement by getting a split out of Chicago, and especially winning in Chicago, which is a very difficult place to play. So big split for the Lumberjacks.
You talk about a statement weekend. The Waterloo Blackhawks have been making a statement all season, but they play Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. They shut out Cedar Rapids at Young Arena 4-0 on Thursday. They go on the road and win 4-1 in Des Moines on Friday. They come back to closer to Waterloo, and they shut out Cedar Rapids again 1-0 in Cedar Rapids on Saturday. 3 games, 1 goal allowed, 2 shutouts for the Waterloo Blackhawks, and they continue to be just as good defensively as the Fighting Saints this season, and that's a huge weekend, and that really flexes those defensive muscles, giving up 1 goal in 3 games, 2 shutouts, I believe, for Logan Stein, which is incredible.
Yeah. Waterloo is really running away with the West right now. They're sitting at 15-4-1 for 31 points. They're 9 points ahead of Lincoln, which is in second place. That's ridiculous for this time of the year.
And Lincoln won 2 out of 3 this weekend. It's not that they had a bad weekend at all.
Exactly. So that's it's hard to believe. I've always said it. I think the Western Conference is the better of the 2 conferences, and man, to have a 9-point lead right now is really remarkable going into the month of December, and that's a huge weekend. You've mentioned shutting out Cedar Rapids, both at home and in Cedar Rapids. That's hard to do, any year. But this year, I think Cedar Rapids is a good offensive team. They've put up a lot of goals in games. So to get shut out twice, it speaks a lot about like you said, the kind of defense that Waterloo's been playing, and it really kind of makes you appreciate that game where Dubuque kind of lit them up over there at Young Arena.
Yeah, and look, the Fighting Saints, I think, right now have one of the top 3 goalies in the USHL, and Eric Portillo. He has to be, if you ended the season today, in the conversation for goalie of the year. But with Waterloo running away with the Western Conference, it feels like Logan Stein is running away with the early consideration for goaltender of the year. He's 8-3. He already has 4 shutouts. Half of his wins are shutouts, a 1.58 goals against and a 938 save percentage. And I know you can make that argument that, well, it's a product of how good the team plays defensively, but you can also make that argument with Portillo because Dubuque is one of, if not the best defensive teams in the league, and Stein's numbers are still much better than his. I mean, it's a great start to the season for Logan Stein.
Yeah, no doubt about it. They've only allowed 44 goals all season, which is second best in the USHL, behind Dubuque's at 38. But again, he's a big part of it, and Gabriel Carrere is not a slouch either. Mm-hmm. And I think for the most part, I think they've split up the goaltending duties pretty evenly.
Yep.
Through the first 20 games of the season. So, and I think that's really good. I mean, for Logan Stein, he's going to be fresh. He's going to be ready to go when you get to the dog days of the season. And again, Waterloo's an outstanding hockey team, and they've been flexing their muscles defensively.
Another team that flexed their muscles this week, Team USA, the combination of the U17s and the U18s played 4 games, and they win all 4 games. Points-wise, they're now in second in the Eastern Conference. Way more games than the Fighting Saints have played. I believe Dubuque has 4 in hand on Team USA and 2 in hand on Chicago, so still a chance again to catch them. But the points don't really matter much right now. All 3 of those teams are on ridiculous paces. But Team USA, as good as the U18s were last year for Team USA, overall I think this is a better group for Team USA because of the balance that they have between the U18s and the U17s and how quickly this U17 squad has figured things out.
Yeah, and I think, if I recall correctly, last year when the U18s this year were U17 guys, they struggled out of the gate. I don't know if they got their first win until mid-December or later in December, and that's tough. I mean, that's really the difference maker, is how good your U17 team can be, and they've been really good. And I think we mentioned, I think they play 60% of the games, and the U18s play 40% of the games. So if your U17s are good and they win, you've got a really good chance of making the playoffs and making a run. And this U17 team is really good, and I think that's really why they're up there where they're at right now.
They're right now second in the Eastern Conference, 15-7 this season, and we saw firsthand how good the U17s could be. They beat Dubuque 5-4 in overtime in Plymouth, Michigan, and they'll see Dubuque will see the U17s a couple more times this season, including game at the end of December. They'll also see the U18s once this season as well. Well, speaking of the seasons, we've switched to December. It's the Christmas season, and as you start to jot down presents for your wish list, we've made a wish list for a couple teams in the USHL. We'll get to that at the other side of this break. Welcome back to the Fighting Saints Report. Jack Milewski, Jim Leitner. Christmas season means wish lists, not just for presents, but also for hypothetical wishes from USHL teams. Some might become reality, you never know, but some, because of how ridiculously we are, might be too far-fetched for them to become reality. But right now we're going to pick 4 teams each, and just what's on their wish list for the holiday season, plain and simple. Is it a piece that they can actually add? Is it something that they might have had in years past that they just don't have this year? We're going to go through 4 teams each, 4 different teams each, and look at their wish lists. And Jim, why don't you kick things off here?
I'm going to start off locally with the Fighting Saints. I'm going to wish for more power play opportunities. Right now, the Fighting Saints have had only 56 power play opportunities, which is the lowest in the USHL. Fargo is the second at 63 power play opportunities. And by contrast, Tri-City has had 126 power plays opportunities this year, and Team USA is at 108. So more than double the number of power plays that the Fighting Saints have had. So I think if the Fighting Saints power play has been really good this year, and if you get a few more opportunities, you get more opportunities to put the puck in the back of the net. And I think that's what I'd like to see, hopefully, for the Fighting Saints. Not talking to my friends out in the black and white shirts or anything, but I think more power play opportunities would be good. But on the flip side of that, Dubuque has also been shorthanded the fewest amount of times in the USHL. They've only been shorthanded 63 times, while Sioux Falls has been shorthanded 64 times. So they're playing in a lot of games where there's not a lot of power plays either way. And I think that means the Fighting Saints have been good 5-on-5, but it'd be interesting to see how much better they could be if they'd get a few more power play opportunities.
Absolutely. I'll start with the Eastern Conference best regular season team last year, the Muskegon Lumberjacks. And I think what they're wishing for is just a little bit of patience from all their fans, because last year was so good. This year has been a little bit rocky. They're towards the bottom of the Eastern Conference, but they haven't been bad, especially after their start. But they have by far the youngest roster in the USHL. They only have 2 1999 birth years, which is the highest year that you can be eligible this year to play. And both those players are goaltenders. Every single one of their forwards, every single one of their defensemen has at least 1 year left of eligibility in the USHL. They have more O2s, they have more O3s than any team in the league. And so I think Muskegon is just waiting for a lot of patience because, and especially with that trade that they just made with Omaha, trading for 2 younger players, it looks like they're playing a little bit of a long game. How quickly can we get these young guys up to speed this year and maybe make a run? But really, let's stack up for next year and be the best, the most experienced USHL team coming back next year. Just a little bit of patience for Muskegon because they're going to be good pretty soon.
I agree, and I think patience, I think, too. I don't know if I necessarily agree with the trade that they made. I don't know if they're trying to shake things up for this year or for next year, but that's a team that I think is going to be a real good contender when you get down towards the end of the season, and as you mentioned, going into the next couple years. My next one, I'm going to go with the Green Bay Gamblers, and I'm going to hope that they get a little more shootout luck because so far throughout the whole USHL this season, there have been only 7 games decided by a shootout, which seems like kind of a low number. Only 7 games. And Green Bay has been in 3 of them, and they've gone 0-3 in those 3 games. So almost half the shootouts have involved Green Bay, and they haven't won any of them yet. So I think if Green Bay gets a little bit more shootout luck, they might be take a little step up in the standings a little bit. So that's what I'd go for. Shootout luck for the Gamblers.
At least they're getting points out of those games, though. But, yeah, you'd much rather translate those into wins. My next wish list is a wish list for Team USA, and specifically the U17s. They're going to wish that they're just playing on the island of Neverland, because I think they might just want this crop of U17s for next year as well, if they could stay at 17 years old. Because as you mentioned, it's the U17s that are playing in the playoffs. It's a good crop of U17s that give Team USA a good chance to make noise in the USHL. So if you can keep this crop of U17s that has been playing so well to begin the season at this age for another year, you might be able to tease a Clark Cup final 2 years in a row, because I think they're going to make a lot of noise throughout the rest of this regular season, and they're not going to be an easy out in the playoffs. So they're just wishing for a little bit of mythical luck to somehow keep all of those players under 17 for another year.
Well, and it's going to be interesting to see, because a lot of times, like the Team USA, when you get towards the end of the season and they prepare for the World Under 18 Championships, sometimes they pull some of those U17 guys up. So it'll be real interesting to see if they take any of those guys up and add them to the roster for the U18 World Tournament or not. And that's going to be an interesting factor. Next, I'm going to go with the Lincoln Stars and just better discipline. That's a team that
No kidding.
has 393 minutes in penalties, which is number one in the USHL by far. And on top of that, their penalty kill is operating only at a 73.3% efficiency, which is worse than the USHL. So on the flip side, they're playing in a lot of games where there's a lot of penalties, so they're getting a lot of power plays, and their power play is at 21.2%, which is pretty good. But I think if you're Lincoln, you want to stay out of the box, because eventually you keep taking that many penalties and you have a penalty kill that's as porous as theirs is, it's going to cost you games.
Yeah, it's funny. The only time we saw Lincoln this season, Dubuque was the undisciplined team, but I'm sure that evens itself out the next time these two teams face. I'm going to the Western Conference as well for my next one, and I'm picking Tri-City, and they're simply wishing for a reincarnation of Roddy Attard or Zach Jones, or both, because last year combined, those two players had over 100 points from the blue line, in Ronnie Attard and Zach Jones. Ronnie Attard was the defenseman of the year. He led the team in scoring. He led the team in goals. You never see that from a defenseman. And this year, Tri-City has struggled to find the consistency offensively, but not just offensively. They're just not as good defensively as well. And I think what was lost in the point totals being so high for Jones and Attard last year was they're really darn good defensively too. Both of them are now NHL draft picks, Attard of the Flyers, Jones of the New York Rangers. And I just think they're wishing for, I don't know if they even have, that talent's hard to just develop in the middle of a season. So they're wishing for one, maybe two of those guys to just be reincarnated and slip in there on the blue line.
That's kind of like asking for a Lamborghini for Christmas.
I've tried a couple times.
It's probably not going to happen. As you mentioned, those guys are so few and far between. You don't see talent like that come around, and to have two of them in the same year is remarkable.
Well, it is a wish list.
It is a wish list. It is.
You got to try. I put a lot of ridiculous stuff on my wish list still, and it's only panned out once or twice. But sometimes you got to ask for it.
Oh, that a boy. My last one, I'm going to go with the Chicago Steel. Just after the news that Greg Moore moved up to the Toronto Marlies, just wishing for continuity, and I think they are going to see that. Brock Sheehan is going to take over. He's been an assistant there in the program, so I'm assuming that he's going to follow the same lead that Greg Moore has mentored him with. So, but I think that's going to be the kind of the issue right now. You got 2 weekends before the holiday break, and this is going to be two really important weekends for the Chicago Steel to kind of get that continuity going, and so I think that's going to be a big key. Can Sheehan step in and maintain exactly what Moore did and keep this team at the top of the conference standings? I think there's a good chance, but that's going to be a key to make sure that all the players are still on board and everything is smooth sailing. But based on everything that I've heard and everything that I've seen, I think it's going to be pretty smooth.
Yeah, Chicago is off to an incredible start, especially that offense. It's by far the best in the league right now. My last one is a defensive wish, but it's because of offense, and it's for the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders. They're wishing for Ben Meehan to be the Ben Meehan of October and early November. He's still top 3 in the USHL in terms of points. He has 16, but he's only had 2 in the last 12 games. He had 14 points through the first 8 games for the Cedar Rapids Rough Riders, and I think part of the reason their offense is starting to slow down is because they're not getting that production from Ben Meehan. Now, can you expect any defenseman to keep up a 14-point in 8-game pace? No, but Meehan, I think, is better than 2 and 12 as well, so their wish is for him to keep being the catalyst on the blue line and just be more consistent like he was at the beginning of the year. And I think that'll go a long way for Cedar Rapids to build on the start that they had offensively, but they've really started to taper off. Part of that might be playing Waterloo 2 times in 3 days, but I think that Meehan is a big key for it as well. And so Cedar Rapids is wishing that the holiday break might breed some more offense for Ben Meehan. But we're going to be here for another 2 weeks. Next week we will have our normally scheduled show at 6 p.m., and then the following week, we will also have a Fighting Saints report for you. That will be another Power Rankings edition, that will be slightly out of date. It will be pre-recorded, so the last weekend of games before the break won't be included in there. But we will get you 2 Fighting Saints reports here in December before we take a week off for the holiday break. And then, of course, back the final weekend of December, which I actually guess we might have 2 weeks off in a row now that I think about it, because that's going to scamper right in towards the New Year time. So we'll make that decision when we do. It depends on how many bowl games we want to watch in those days, because college football will take precedent over just about everyone else's sports world for that span between December, between Christmas and really the second week in January. But we'll be talking hockey here for the next 2 weeks on the Fighting Saints report. And final thoughts here from you, Jim. 2 big games against Muskegon. It's rare that you're going to see back-to-backs against the same team in the USHL. But it's Muskegon. It's just not the Muskegon team that Dubuque faced at the beginning of the season at the Fall Classic.
No, not at all. I think this is a much better team. And as you mentioned, it's a younger team that's been improving quite a bit over the last few weeks. And again, getting a split out of Chicago, that's a real good eye-opener. And I hopefully that's something that resonates within the Fighting Saints locker room over the next couple of days, so they have a few really good days of practice in preparation for Muskegon. It's nice, though, because you're playing the same team twice, so you're really only preparing for one team, even though it is a team that you're not really that familiar with. I think that's a good thing, and I think the Fighting Saints will come out guns a-blazing Friday and Saturday.
Friday and Saturday night. Again, Friday family 4-pack, Saturday teddy bear toss, 2 against Muskegon, 2 at home. Fighting Saints are happy to not be hopping on a bus and playing in front of the home fans once again. That's all the time we have for the Fighting Saints report today. For Jim Leitner, I'm Jack Milewski. We'll talk to you next weekend, the second to last Fighting Saints report before the holiday break.